Well, hey, you guys, I seem to have lost Aliza here the last few minutes, but I'm not lost because this is such an awesome party. Look who I've run into. It's the great multiple Emmy award winning Mr. Dan Curry. Dan, I'm so glad you could come by and join us here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
This is it's so good to see you. It's been a rough year for everybody. And before I say any more, we have that trite phrase, the person who needs no introduction. But I want to say Dan was an 18-year veteran of what people are now calling the Berman era of Star Trek. But Next Generation all the way through DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, increasingly as roles and structure shifted to be visual effects producer, which was kind of unique on Star Trek. Worked on a couple of the movies, did the titles, went far beyond the realm of visual effects. And those in the know, like Klingon fans, know that all these major contributions to Klingon culture, starting with the Batleth and the Mechlith, but all fun stuff. And kind of what's also exciting this year, and I'm glad you're here to talk with us about it in more than one way, is you've got a book celebrating all this coming out.
This is true. It was commissioned by CBS, and the book is to celebrate the many, many people that were involved in creating the visual effects for Star Trek. And also it talks about the symbiosis between the various departments, that without the cooperation and support of the art department, the makeup department, the camera department, we wouldn't have been able to create all those illusions. And the other important thing to keep in mind is that I was fortunate to be in a leadership position, but the effects were created by an army of really dedicated, incredibly talented artists who had an amazing learning curve to get to the level where they could push the images we wanted onto screen. And the other important thing is that we worked with people in motion control, 2D compositing, digital animation, matte painting, and it was a joy and a pleasure to work with so many gifted people and be part of creating those illusions to create imagery for the universe in which our Star Trek stories unfolded.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I've known you since I was working on my second iteration, the one I got to actually work on and didn't have to do in 6 months, the red edition of the Next Generation Companion. And I got to meet you and all the incredible army of backstage people that brought Star Trek to life. But the thing I've always known about you is, yes, you're always very humble and very quick to point out the army of people that work on the show. And it's people on staff and also the vendors at the different effects houses and compositing Absolutely. And editing. And so this just popped in my mind, and I want to get back to you at Star Trek, but I don't know because you work with the Visual Effects Society, which is kind of the visual effects world's industries.
It's
guild
worldwide organization in
right.
many countries. I was honored last year to be elected a Visual Effects Society fellow, so I was super appreciative of that. And the other thing I wanted to cover in the book is the evolution of visual effects technology. When we started Star Trek, we shot motion control miniatures. Our matte paintings were done in oils, like the incredible background I have behind me, done by my friend and super talented artist, Sid Dutton. This is the inside of the Borg cube.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Green paper. And I did a lot of special diagrams to explain how things were done. And there are illustrations, there are anecdotes from the stars and crew. There are images of our motion control stage and how many people are required to bring a single illusion into existence. And so I wanted to preserve those technologies before they disappear. Now that everything's done on the computer, we have a lot more limitations in even how far the ship could roll before you see the model mount. And so I wanted that to be remembered before it got lost.
Well, that's one thing. Yes, those 18 years I mentioned into today, we go from the motion control, and that's like the models, the miniatures on a camera mount with the camera, either moving to the camera or the camera moving in. And the advancement of technology there was, in the original series, it was they are moving the mount and the camera is stationary, and motion control was kind of out of the Star Wars Revolution.
Well, just the opposite. We
Yeah.
kept the models in one place and moved the camera, and the camera could go back and forth on the track. It'd go
Right.
east, west on another track, and up and down on a tower. And the reason you wanted to keep the model in one spot was that way you didn't have to light a corridor. You just had to light one spot. And the model could roll, pitch, and yaw, but it didn't go back and forth. And then to make sure the background moved in proper sync with the model, we would take the same pan tilt information that we used on the camera move, on the dolly move, but without the track information, so that we would stick the camera inside a little cyclorama of backlit stars, and that way you see the stars move in proper.
I mean, the original computer revolution in visual effects was the whole motion control programming, where you're augmenting the physical models. But you were there from that era, and not just the physical process, but how in the world do we do this on a TV show cranking out with the budget that we have? That's the other part of the ingenuity here. And a lot of the, that's what's fun about some of your stories. And I know what's in the book is some of the analog things that you all did on the time, not so much even money, but on the time pressure you had. And then we get into CGI, where it's a whole different, the early days are like, how much can we render, and how do we get rid of the CGI look and all of that? The perch you had from those days, just taking what was available and revolutionizing it and pushing the envelope to make it happen. And then transitioning into the CGI era and have it look good and presentable is just.
We were no strangers to 60 to 80 hour weeks.
Yes.
I know when we did the finale of Deep Space Nine, What You Leave Behind, we had 350 shots, including space battles, fire caves, and we had a little over 3 weeks to do them. And so we just got everybody on board. We barely went home. We would just stay up all night and keep shooting and shooting and shooting, or compositing until we were done. And we barely finished the time.
And for the rest of the company, I always loved how at the wrap party, when they've finished on stage, it's like, well, we'll come over for an hour, but I've got 2 months of work to do still, or whatever it would be. Like, you would be the last ones home. Yeah. I've got a question from the chat here, and then I want to talk about the book and some of your artwork too, while we've got the time. So Glenn Vegas is saying, were you a Star Trek fan before you worked on the show? And I know the answer.
Not that much. When the original series was on, I was in college and didn't really get a chance to see it. In those days, no college students had TVs, and we didn't have time to watch anyway. So I was aware of it, but I've always been a science fiction fan. So anything with science fiction would be right up my alley. And probably the most influential movie that got me hooked was Forbidden Planet, which was the inspiration for a lot of the cerebral sci-fi that followed it.
And a lot of Gene's, the service, having ranks and people with positions and a crew and all that. A lot of the inspiration for what Star Trek became. Hey, I keep saying this. I want to talk about the book, and I want to talk about what's been going on with you this year. But really quickly, what was the first thing? You came in as the first season was unspooling on Next Generation, and as they realized that their visual effects needs were going to be way bigger than what they were going to have to find a way to staff and afford in budget all the visual effects Bob Justman started off trying to keep it small, like the original series with library shots, and that quickly became not a thing. What was the first thing I remember the episode you came in, but do you remember memory of the first shot you worked on?
Well, I was actually involved prior to production. Peter Lorison, who had left his post as TV post-production supervisor for Paramount Pictures, asked me if I would do 40 storyboards of stock shots that they thought would suffice for the entire run of the series. And we had the Enterprise leaving orbit, entering orbit, flyby, and Andy Probert had designed the Enterprise 1701D, and I had photographs of that. so I could have a reference to doing those storyboards. And then during the pilot, they quickly realized that they needed more help to get the volume of work done. And Peter called me up and asked me if I would join the team. So I left my position at Cinema Research as Director of Creative Services and joined Star Trek because I thought it would be more fun. And it was.
Well, the book is coming out. It's been pushed back a little bit. It's December 1st.
December 1st now, yeah.
Yes, and we've got the information about getting that. But I wanted to take just a second to update everybody. You've an incredible artist, as you were saying. I say analog artist, which makes it sound so. All the traditional art modes and had done art and did a lot of those for the show. And we've got some pieces that are, a lot of them are in the book, including, yes, the Batleth and the Mechleth. But I wanted, that's all there. And a lot of us know that, and we've got images of it. But I want to talk about some of your art there too. We've got, if they can show this, everything from very traditional. This is a Cape Cod house that you have a connection with. There's one image.
Well, I did that from memory where we used to live on Cape Cod, and that was in the Katuitt salt marshes. And there were these beautiful reflections, and at a certain time of day, there was a period of absolute stillness, and usually happened in the autumn when the sea breeze would change to a land breeze. And there was that 15-minute window where the shift was happening, and I wanted to capture that stark, absolute stillness of that moment.
Well, it's haunting, but I love that because you have that, and then you get into some of the surreal kind of quality. There's one that's over the years, well, several things, but the one I know you enjoyed was the one that's structural, and it's charcoal gray. Well,
this one got me started doing matte painting. Marcia Lucas, who was George's wife at the time, saw an exhibition of painting and came and found me and asked me if I was interested in matte painting. And I said, "What's that?" And that's the beginning of that career. And that was the view from the Shrestha Lodge in Kathmandu. And I did that painting while I was waiting for my trekking permit, which took a couple of weeks.
Well, you have a lot of Star Trek projects that you were able to contribute to. Some of the backgrounds and landscapes came out of your time in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, well, if you look at this painting and you look at Klingon architecture, you could see the influence of Himalayan architecture and Laotian architecture on the exteriors of Klingon buildings and Klingon outposts.
It's handy. It comes in handy for that kind of thing.
Your life becomes your reference.
Yes. Well, and then sometimes you even you marry aspects of your.
Well, that's what artists do, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. So we've got some other images here that some of your and I'm going to hope here that Arlo can get them up for us. Some of the other aspects. So I've got this one that's structural, and it's Devin, your son. Is there a story behind that piece? Yeah,
he was 15 at the time I did that one, and I wanted to do a portrait of him, but I was not interested in doing a traditional portrait. So he sat down and I did a quick sketch of him and spent the next 2 years doodling on a 5-foot tall canvas with charcoal and Prisma pencils.
Yeah. So you've got a wide variety of art. Some of it we've seen on screen that's traditional, that lends itself to matte paintings or aspects of things, aspects of traditional needs that the show needs. But your original art here in fact, somebody asked in the chat, Nanny196 said, take some time to chat about your own artwork. And we're doing that. But what I want to marry two topics here, it's been an insane year here. So glad that your book is coming out, and so much of these we're all Trek here. Everybody's interested in the specific details of shows are cool, but also that big tapestry of how visual effects have changed and the army of people. I was going to say, nowadays, it seems like when we watch movies and even TV series, we see the armies of people are all getting screen credit, which wasn't true back in the day, unfortunately. But at least your book is helping to, give people the scope of that. That's one thing I've always tried to do too, is remind people of the scope. But this year you had a scare. I mean, and I'm kind of, you've brought some artwork here that we're going to show, but tell everybody what was up with you the last couple of months.
Well, on July 2nd, I thought I was having a heart attack and went to see our cardiologist, who gave me an EKG and sent me right across the street to St. Joseph's Hospital to the emergency room. And they gave me a COVID test. And it turned out that it wasn't a heart attack, it was COVID-19. And they moved me into isolation. I spent days in the hospital, occasionally watching a covered gurney go by my door. And then they sent me home, and I divided the house in two with plastic sheets so that my wife, who thank God never contracted the virus, lived in one end of the house and I lived in the other. And after a few weeks of isolation, came back up to rejoin what purports to be normalcy. And it was a very frightening experience, especially when they come in and ask you all these questions. Well, what if this? Do you want to be intubated if something happens? How do you want your body to be dealt with? And it wakes you up, and it becomes especially infuriating when I see people still thinking it's a hoax and laughing it off, and it's hardly a hoax, trust me.
Well, I know you were sitting here thinking, but wait, I have a book coming out. I have a tour. I have promotion to do for my... We don't want that. Well, Dan, listen, this has been a wonderful... I'm so thrilled we've got word of the book out, but also just giving folks a little inkling. Everybody that works on Star Trek, they're so multi-talented, have so many different passions and interests. And I know you do. And from the VES on down, I mean, just the political world. But anyway, everybody, the book is coming out. Dan's The Art and Artistry of Dan Curry is close to the title.
Close. It's the publisher's title. I would have gone with something less grandiose, but it's Star Trek: The Artistry of Dan Curry.
Okay, shut up and take it, Dan. No, no. Listen, thank you so much for wandering by the party, and I'm so glad you're here to talk with us. And I can't wait for all the other book events coming down the line. There we go.
Hey, Dan, everybody, vote.
There we go.